Hello, everyone, and Shavuot Tov. Thank you so much for joining us again for the second installment of Rabbi Shlomo Zuckier's class, Resting Theology, where we'll be looking at some sections of Masechet Shabbat. Okay, I guess anything else that I...
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. As always, everyone is invited to turn on their cameras if they can. And yeah, just to remind everyone, the plan is as last week and as next week, we're going to be working through a Talmudic passage, a Sugyot, that touches on some important aspects of the theology of Shabbos. Last week, we discussed the idea of hashocheach ikar Shabbos, someone who forgets about the concept of Shabbos overall, and different iterations of that, or forgets that the day is Shabbos, sort of how many mistakes are they making, how many karbanos would they have to bring, and different ways that pointed to the sort of the centrality of Shabbos. What does it mean to not to forget Shabbos? Maybe there's some, if you ever knew what Shabbos was, forgetting about it somehow is more blameworthy than other forgettings of Jewish laws, just because how central it is. And there were other interesting points there. This week's topic is going to build on that. It's actually sort of stuck in the middle of it in the Gemara. It's a related topic, not about someone who forgets about the concept of Shabbos or forgets that today is Shabbos, but someone who actually, by dint of circumstance, can't know when Shabbos is. So the Gemara, the Sugyot in the Gemara is called Mehalech Bamidbar, someone who's walking in the desert. Yerushalmi actually has a slightly different name for it. We'll see. It'll be a little interesting. But basically, consider a scenario where someone's stuck in the desert. Let's say, like in the movies, right? You wake up, you clearly were knocked out for a while. You don't know how long. You wake up somewhere in the middle of nowhere. You don't know where you are. You don't know what day it is, right? All your, you don't have internet. You don't have a watch, and you just have no idea when Shabbos is. So what do? Right? Obviously, you have a couple of issues. Number one, you want to try to get back to society and you want to be able to eat so you don't die. On the one hand, that those seem pretty reasonable. And at the same time, there's going to be Shabbos. 1 out of every 7 days is Shabbos by definition. And you don't want to be working on Shabbos if you can help it. So what do? How do you deal with this? So that's the scenario we're going to look at. And I think, I guess in theory, it's of practical relevance if anyone's ever stuck in that situation, although I hope not. But it's much more relevant, I think, in terms of the theological significance of what this will tell us about the nature of Shabbos. So I'm going to share the screen. We're going to work through the Gemara together, and then we're going to look through some commentaries and some different applications of this passage that I think will be very illuminating in terms of how we understand the day and the experience of Shabbos. So I'm going to turn on share screen momentarily. Okay, and just resize this. Okay, so we're on Shabbos Daf Samach Tesem Beis 69b. If you recall, yesterday we were between 67 and 70. So this is right smack in the middle of that sugya about hashocheach ikar Shabbos, and it's somewhat related. Again, there you forget about what Shabbos is. Here you know exactly what Shabbos is. You just, not just you don't know, you can't possibly know what day it is. So let's look at the Gemara here. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, Haya mahalech baderech o bamidbar, or Haya mahalech bamidbar, however you read that. Someone's walking on the path or in the desert, right? They're walking somewhere, not in a community, not in society. Ve'eni odea emasai Shabbos, and he doesn't know when Shabbos is, right? Again, imagine your own scenario. However, whatever the case may be, presumably this is not someone negligent. It's someone who just, by some crazy circumstance, doesn't know when Shabbos is. What do? So here's the first opinion. Mona shisha yamim u'mishamer yom echad. You count 6 days. So let's say you find out 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's day 0. Then the next day is day 1. Call it Sunday. You count 6 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the 7th day, mishamer yom echad. You keep 1 day. You keep 1 day of Shabbos. So the 7th day, the 7th day after you find out will be Shabbos after you count 6 days. That's the first view. That's Rav Huna's view. Chia barav omer mishamar yom echad umona shisha. Well, he says, well, let's flip that, right? So you find out at 3 p.m. The immediate next day is Shabbos, and then you count 6 weekdays until the next Shabbos. So the two views so far is, how do you determine when Shabbos is? Either it's the 7th day after you find out, or it's the first day after the day you find out. I think some of the commentators talk about what about the day itself, and they say, well, you sort of have to be careful the day you find out because you sort of haven't reset yet. So you have to just presume the worst, or I don't know, the best, whatever it is. Presume it's Shabbos for the day that you find out, and then the question is, when are going to be all the Shabbos going forward, either a week later or the next day? Okay, so b'mai kamifligi, what are they arguing about? What's the basis of this debate? Right? Do you start right away with Shabbos, or do you go first 6 days of Chol and then go to Shabbos? Mar savar kivriyaso shel olam, umar savar ka'adam harishon. So we'll translate it literally, and then maybe we'll take a peek at Rashi. So one opinion says it's like the creation of the world, and the other one says it's like Adam Harishon. Like, let everyone think about how to take that, but we'll jump to Rashi. Rashi helps us out here. Rashi says, Kivriyaso shel olam, yimei chol nimnu tchila. Right? Think about how the story of creation happened. God creates the world, so you start with day 1 of Chol, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the 7th day is Shabbos. Right? So it's just like the creation of the world, sort of the more intuitive view. If you're trying to impose the description of the creation of the world onto this person's experience, that would fit very well. You start with 6 days of Chol and then 1 day of Shabbos. The alternative view, though, is Ka'adam HaRishon, Shenivra Be'erev Shabbos, V'yom Rishon L'minyano Shabbos Haya. Think about Adam, right? If you're, let's say you were Adam or you were Chava, you were one of the first 2 humans created on Erev Shabbos, on Friday. So the first full day of your life is Shabbos, right? You're created, right? Like, imagine this scenario. Basically, if you imagine you're Adam, if Adam was Jewish in this scenario, right? If Adam kept Shabbos, so right, it's like again, choose your sci-fi movie where like this being shows up and is created and gains consciousness randomly in the middle of nowhere, and so the first day, Adam's first day is Shabbos. So maybe it should be the same thing, right? You wake up, you don't know where things are, you don't know what it is. So pretend you're Adam, and the very next day will be Shabbos for you, because Adam was created on Friday. So those are the 2 views. I'll just, before we continue in the Gemara, I was wondering if other people had additional thoughts and other possible explanations how you might explain these 2 views, right? You start Shabbos right away, or you start Shabbos 7 days later. You start counting from 1, or you start like Sunday, or you start counting from Shabbos. Any thoughts? There's something in the chat. Okay. One seems more intuitive. Shabbat is the day of rest. You can't rest on day 1. Meaning the first view, Nathan, you're suggesting that the first view, counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then Shabbos. Okay, because Shabbos is a day of rest. You can't rest on day 1. Okay, so I'd say I think that there is definitely a certain logic to that, right? Maxine, you're agreeing. Shabbat would require some preparation. So Nathan, on your note, you can't rest on day 1. Part of the question is who's doing the resting, because right, and here's where the resting theology comes in. Is Shabbos about being like Adam, or is Shabbos about being like God? Right? Is Shabbos about a human fact that humans need rest, or is it about emulating God, who, despite not needing rest, chose to rest on the 7th day? And it could be, I think, you're Nathan and Maxine, you're presenting one side that, on God's model, God created for 6 days and only then did he rest. But maybe, maybe we sort of blindly follow God's schedule of resting on God's 7th day, even though Adam didn't work at all. He just sort of was created. Well, there are midrashim about he actually did a lot of things on his first day, but fine, we'll put that aside. The very next day, he's already resting, maybe because it's not rest from himself. It's more about emulating God. God chooses to rest on this day. You do the same thing, even if you didn't work during the week. But okay, so that's one additional angle. Other thoughts? So I think another point that Nathan and Maxine, you're both assuming, is that you're sort of looking at Shabbos as the end of the week, which again makes sense if you think about like if you read Bereshit, it sounds like that. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then the 7th day is Shabbos. But I don't know if you downplay the significance of the way it's presented in Bereshit, maybe you can think of Shabbos actually the first day of the week. It's certainly, so to speak, the most important day of the week. So maybe that's also part of what's going on here, that you can say you start with Shabbos and then everything else follows. And I think another angle, may or may not be the same point, is if you're thinking about this from like a risk management perspective, with the risk being violation of Shabbos, you want to minimize possible violation of Shabbos. So right away, why would you say, well, I'll sort of take a risk for the next 6 days? If your ratio is going to be 1 day of Shabbos per 7 days, which is a very reasonable ratio, you want to minimize risk, start right away. Don't like work the next 6 days when it might be Shabbos. So I think I think I'd agree that on first glance, the first option seems more intuitive, to work 6 days and then keep Shabbos. But I think there are some countervailing arguments to support the second view. So just to give them a little support as well. And of course, there's what Rashi and the Gemara said, is it like God or is it like Adam, which we can take in sort of a technical way, or we can think more broadly about what is the point of Shabbos and who are we emulating. Okay, Ozzy throws out there, the fact that Shabbos is every 7 days is totally arbitrary. Well, I mean, I guess it depends what you mean by arbitrary. If you by arbitrary, you mean that it's not tied to a naturalistic phenomenon, the way that, say, the month is, right, tied to the moon circling the earth, or the way that the year is, sort of, at least, with adjustments in Judaism, the year is tied to the seasons and the earth circling the sun. So yeah, in that sense, it's not naturalistic. I guess whether you would call it arbitrary in the full sense of the term, I guess depends on whether God's actions are arbitrary or God's commandments are arbitrary. But fine, that's probably not what Ozzy meant. Yeah, so it's something that we do. Well, I think there's, and this is what we're saying, there's two sides to it. We do it because God commanded it. We also do it because we're emulating God. We're doing what God did, resting on the 7th day. And there's this message that we can't go on forever. We have to rest at some point. And I don't know if you have to say this, but one could say that God sort of determined the ideal ratio of work to rest is 1 day of rest, or at least 1 day of mandated rest per 6 days of work. And so you could argue it's not. You could argue it's the opposite of arbitrary. It's sort of based on human nature, and divine wisdom tells us how best to break it up. But yeah, it is important. It is an important point that Shabbos is not tied to a natural phenomenon. I think one of the classes that Drisha is running focuses on that point. So yeah, okay, that's helpful as well. Any final thoughts on this first debate in the Gemara before we continue? Who says we have to rest? Only God says we have to rest. Well, yeah, so that's true in terms of like a commandment. I think it's also sort of a fact of biology, meaning a computer might be able to run a program straight. Humans physically can't run straight. You need to stop. You need to sleep. You need to, leaving aside questions of fueling. All we need is sleep. I'm also not sure that's true. I'm not a biologist, but I feel like if someone was doing, physically taxing labor, at some point they would break down, regardless of the sleep issue. Just their body would give out. But I don't know. There's like these ultra marathon runners and whatnots. They do weird stuff. So I don't know. But in general, let's say most normal, people feel a strong urge to rest regularly. How much? Every 7 days, right? It doesn't tie to that directly, but maybe there is some deeper wisdom. Again, I can't prove that, but just throwing it out there as a possibility. Okay, any final thoughts on the beginning of the Gemara, or should we continue? So we have two views so far, right? You're stuck in the desert. You don't know when Shabbos is. Option number one is keep 6 days, work for 6 days and then keep Shabbos. Option number two is first keep Shabbos and then work for 6 days. These fundamentally are similar views. The question just is, where do you start? But both of them basically say 1 out of every 7 days is Shabbos. The other 6 days are Chol. That's the basic view with two versions so far. Now the Gemara is going to challenge this. Meisfe, challenge from a brisa. Hayem mahalech baderech. Someone's walking on the road, right? Ve'eni yodea emosai Shabbos. He doesn't know when Shabbos is. Same case. Although here it's the path and before it was the desert, but right, same basic case. So what's the din? What's the law? Mishamer Yom Echad Lishisha. He keeps one day for every 6. Right? So for every 6 days of Chol, there's 1 day of Shabbos. So what exactly does that mean? The Gemara says, My lav, Mona Shisha, Umishamer Yom Echad. Doesn't that language imply 1 day of Shabbos per 6 of Chol? Well, presumably that means you have to first work for 6 days and then have Shabbos. I think that's, in some ways, is what Nathan and Maxine were pointing to before. You need to work in order to rest. And maybe that this text points in that direction as well. So doesn't that prove the first view of Rav Huna against Chia Barav? Lo, not necessarily. Mishamer Yom Echad Umona Shisha. Maybe when you say 1 day of rest per 6 days of work, it's out of order. First you, or technically it's in order, but it's not the implication that the work comes first. Maybe you rest and then you keep 6 days. Not really a proof. Ihachi Mishamer Yom Echad L'Shisha. Mishamer Yom Echad Umona Shisha Mibayle. But then the language is a little odd. That you say you keep 1 day per 6. Why not say keep 1 day of Shabbos and then work for 6? Wouldn't that be a simpler formulation? That's one question. V'od. Another question, this is from a different source, a different proof text. Tanya, also taught in a brisa, the same scenario, right? You're going on the path or in the desert, you don't know when Shabbos is, what do? Moneh Shisha U'Mishamer Yom Echad very clearly says you keep 6 days, you count 6 days, meaning you work for 6 days, and then Mishamer Yom Echad, you keep 1 day of Shabbos. Tiyuvta, the Chia Barav, Tiyuvta. We've successfully disproven Chia Barav, the second view, and the view that's standing, at least for now, is the view that you work 6 days and then you take Shabbos. Okay, so far so good, but it's about to get much more complicated. So Amar Rava, and just to think about the generations, right? Chia Barav and Rav Huna are second, third generation Amoraim. Rava, who is a fourth generation Amora, is a generation and a half later, he comes in and says, here's my take. It's gonna be a little bit different. He says, B'chol yom v'yom oselo kedei parnasaso. Every day, right? Again, you're out in the desert. You didn't bring food with you, so like in the olden days before they had technology, because you didn't bring it with you. You eat what you kill, or you eat what you cook, right? So you can't. It's not like you go to the store and get food, or you go find someone, they give you their food. You need to produce whatever food you have. Now, it just so happens that the prohibitions of Shabbos basically correlate to all forms of food procurement, right? There's like hunting and shechting, that's prohibited in terms of getting meat. And then there's like planting and harvesting and grinding and baking and all that, kneading. So the processes of getting meat or of baking things, making bread, that's sort of the paradigmatic set of prohibitions on Shabbos. So you're gonna have a hard time. Sort of this is like the classic, the original idea of Shabbos. Right nowadays we have all these appliances and you can buy things, and but in this scenario you can't buy anything. You don't have any appliances. Any food you're gonna have is gonna involve melacha basically, unless you get lucky and there's an apple that falls from a tree or something before Shabbos. You basically need to do malacha to get food. So what do? Rava says, "B'chol yom b'yom oselo kedei parnasaso." Every single day you can prepare your food, right? Because otherwise you're going to die. And in Judaism, right, Shabbos is a very important principle, keeping Shabbos, but it does not override the value of life. If you have no food and you're going to die, you can certainly do whatever, violate whatever. It's not violating, but do what's usually a violation of whatever Shabbos rules in order to get food. So Rava says every day you can work to get your food. And this again is in brackets, so not clear if we should have it, but these at least assumed except for that day, meaning you keep 1 out of every 7 days of Shabbos, whichever way, right? Let's assume you work for 6 days and then you keep Shabbos. That 7th day, you can't prepare food. You prepare food the other 6 days. Wait a second. The Gemara says, Vahahu yoma lemus. What do you mean you don't prepare food? You'll starve to death. If you prepare every day, you make food kedei parnasaso, right? You have to be very precise. Enough to live on, right? Lefarnes, parnasa is to make a living, literally. So you make as much food as you need to live every day, sort of a subsistence level of eating. So if you skip a day, that's extremely dangerous. You might die. So what does it mean you don't work on Shabbos and you don't eat anything? You're going to die. No. You don't starve yourself. To avid me esmol shtei parnasos. It means that the previous day, Friday or whatever, pseudo Friday, you prepare double food because you know the next day's gonna be Shabbos. So today I'll make double the food, and then I'll be good. But no, it says Vidilma may esmol Shabbos havai. Right. The whole point here. Why does Rava say that every day you only make your basic minimal subsistence amount of food? Because you don't know every day of the week is a 1 in 7 chance of being Shabbos. You don't want to take that risk. So that's why Rava says every day you only make as much food as you need to make it to the next day to live, right? So you make you bake whatever it is, one loaf of bread for the whole day, because that's what you need to make it through the day. You can't make more than that because maybe it's Shabbos and you're violating Shabbos. So you can't make any more than the basics. And so if that's the case, then don't say, oh yeah, the day that's Shabbos, I won't work at all. I'll do double the previous day. Well, you're not helping yourself. Again, do the math. Do the math. It's a 1 in 7 chance that Friday is actually Shabbos, and it's a 1 in 7 chance that Saturday is actually Shabbos. So why would you work double on one day and 0 on the next day? You have no right to do that. Every day you only have a right to do the basic minimum that allows you to live. So we say Ella kol yom v'yom osa lo parnasa. So afilu ahu yoma. Every day you make the basics. You prepare your basic subsistence amount to make it, through the day without dying. Afilu ahu yoma, even on the day that you're marking as Shabbos. Now notice what happened here. Through Rava's opinion, right? Think about how the basic idea before, there were 2 views of it, but basically it was you make up your own schedule, right? One of every 7 days is Shabbos. The other days are cold. You can do whatever work you want. Rava comes in, Ilan, I love that formulation, right? Rava comes in and says every day is Shabbos and no day is Shabbos, right? Because every single day you need to do your risk analysis. You say it might be Shabbos. I can't do any more than the basic subsistence, and that's true for all 7 days. The 6 weekdays and the 7th Shabbos day. So then the Gemara has a very reasonable question. V'ahu yoma b'may minkarle. So what does it mean to be Shabbos? If you can actually, you do the same thing every day. Every day you're allowed to do work only the amount to make it to the next day. Pikuach nefesh, the basic parnasa, making the basic subsistence amount of food. So then how is Shabbos any different? And the answer is v'kidusha ve'avdalta. You can make kiddush and havdalah on that 7th day, right? So you make your Kiddush and Havdalah, but otherwise, it sounds like that day is the same as every other day of the week. Every day, because of the risk of Shabbos, you only do a minimal amount of work, enough to make food for the next day. Once every 7 days, you say, today's Shabbos, and you make Kiddush before and you make Havdalah afterwards. So the way it comes out here, there is a bit of a balancing between 2 factors, right? The every day being maybe Shabbos, and the 7th day having some special status. And we're going to see there's going to be a lot of different angles on which way you pull it. Is it really that this 7th day is the real Shabbos? Or is it no? Every single day is really a risk and sort of minimizing what that Kiddush Havdalah, what you do on the 7th day. But Rava is a huge departure from the first 2 views we saw. Right? It's not like you have an actual week structure. Not really. Only in terms of Kiddush and Havdalah. Again, you might play that up, but the average day you're treating as maybe Shabbos with huge repercussions. Right? You're basically not allowed to do anything except that you can't do on Shabbos, except the amount of food that makes it through that makes you get through the day. Okay. And now here's an out. This is sort of this depends on the details of the case, but it'll make it a bit trickier, but it won't be so relevant. Amar Rava im haya makir mixas hayom sheyatza bo ose malacha kol hayom kula. Let's say there's a scenario where you went on a business trip through the desert, and the day you left. You left. Let's say you pass out and you come to. It was only a couple of hours. It's the same day you left. Turns out you forgot what day you left. Was today a Tuesday or was today a Thursday? I don't know. But that you left today. Well, you can do malacha that whole day and next week, right? Whatever day of the week that you realize that today's the day you left, but you don't know what day of the week it is. That day is not Shabbos because you would never have left on Shabbos. You don't go on business trips on Shabbos because you keep Shabbos in the scenario. So that day you can keep, and a week later and a week later. So the Gemara says Pshita, obviously, right? This is basic. This is just like basic accounting of days. What's it telling us? It says Maudatema. I might have thought Kaven the Shabbos lo nafik b'malei Shabbat nami lo nafik. I might have thought this person doesn't go on business trips on Shabbos. They also don't go on business trips on Friday. And you might think, like, if you realize the day that you realize, okay, today's the day I left. I don't know what day of the week it is, but it's the day I left. You can presume it's neither Saturday nor Friday, and then you can do malacha on that day and a week later, and also the next day, because you know you didn't leave on a Friday. You might have thought that Kamash Malan, Zimin in the Mishkach Shiarto, Mikari bin Nafik. No, that's not true, because sometimes people do go on business trips on Friday. If you catch a ride with someone, they're only going on Friday. Okay, so that's the Bavli, right? So this last piece was sort of just sorting out a different scenario where you might be able to exclude a couple of days from the calculus. But basically, we have three total views of two different types, right? One type, the one we just saw, is Rava. Rava says basically every day you need to worry that it's Shabbos. You can only do a minimal amount of work. And then on the seventh day, you make Kiddush and Havdalah. But it doesn't sound like you're really treating that day too specially. And the other two views are that every 7 days is Shabbos. The other 6 days in between are not Shabbos. They're Chol. That's what it sounds like, certainly. And the only question is, do you start with Shabbos or do you end with Shabbos? And we talked about the differences, why that might be, some of the logic there. But we now need to think about, and we'll first look at the Yerushalmi before we do this, but hold this thought. What's at stake? What's the big difference between Rava, that every day is maybe Shabbos, versus the first two opinions where they say you can say the seventh day is Shabbos, the other days are Chol. But before we go there, let's go to the Yerushalmi. This is a bit anachronistic, but this is certainly how most people study Talmud. You start with the Bavli and then you go back in time to the Yerushalmi. But here we'll see. There'll be an interesting additional angle that we didn't have in the Bavli. So let's start here, and it's in the same position, right? This is Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph, 7th chapter of Shabbos, as we did last week. We're continuing that Perek, beginning of the 7th chapter. So let's look at how the Yerushalmi refers to this case. It's actually very cool. Gadol shenishba bein akum. Gadol, an adult who was captured or kidnapped or something like that among the Gentiles. Why is this an interesting formulation in light of last week? Yeah, Maxine.
I mean, presumably this child wouldn't know about Shabbos then.
So right, so I think you're going back to what we saw last week about a tino, shenishba beina akum, a child or a baby that was captured among the Gentiles. It's the same case, except it's an adult. It's a gadol, an adult who was captured. So on the one hand, this adult knows what Shabbos is, but the presumption is, and it's too bad Ezra's not here. He was here last week. This, I think, would be of great interest to him. The adult doesn't know what day of the week Shabbos is. This implies, at least in this scenario, that he's captured among Gentiles who don't have a 7-day week. So if they did have a 7-day week, he'd just be like, okay, which of your 7-day week correlates to Shabbos, and then he'd figure it out. So they don't have a 7-day week, and that's why he has no idea when Shabbos is, right? So it's interesting. It's sort of a companion case to what we had last week. Katan, or Tinok Shenishba, a child who's kidnapped, never knows, or is captured, never knows what Shabbos is, because they never taught about it. An adult who's kidnapped will know what Shabbos is, they just won't know when it is. And it won't be their fault. They'll just have no way of knowing when Shabbos is. Okay, so what do? Ravu Shmuel Chad Amar Mona Shisha ve'osa Shabbos, Bechrana Amar Osa Shabbos Mona Shisha. These are the same two views we saw attributed to other people in the Bavli. Do you count 6 days of Chol and then keep Shabbos, or do you start with Shabbos then have 6 days of Chol? So those two views are accounted for. But now this view is going to be a little funky. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Elazar v'Shem Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. Here's what he says. Here's what you do. Mona Shisha ve'osa Shabbos. You say 6 days of Chol, right? You show up on your desert island or wherever you are at 3 o'clock. The next day you keep as Chol for 6 days, and then you keep Shabbos on the 7th day. Then Chamisha ve'osa Shabbos. The following week you have a five weekdays and one Shabbos. Arba'a ve'osa Shabbos. Then you have a 4-day week and then Shabbos. Gimel ve'osa Shabbos, a 3-day week. Shnayim ve'osa Shabbos. Echad ve'osa Shabbos. And he doesn't spell it out, but it might be that this is iterative, right? It seems like it. Otherwise, you'd always keep Shabbos. You then go back and say, okay, you have a 6-day work week and then Shabbos, and then a 5-day work week and then Shabbos, then 4, 3, 2, 1. So this is a really interesting structure. The Gemara itself is going to analyze it here. Amar Rav Mana, inishtabai bitzlasa hava avad bishovsa. Wait a second. If, let's say you were captured on a Tuesday, or again, you don't know when you were captured. Let's say you were captured on a Tuesday and you realize it then, that would mean the correct day of Shabbos would be day 4. So if you do the math, and we're not going to do it ourselves, but if you do the math, you do this whole cycle of 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you will never actually keep Shabbos. You'll just be Hava Aved B'Shovsa. The whole time you're going to be working on Shabbos. All of those days, which is what you like sum 6 times 7 over 2, 9, 27. All 27 of those days, you're going to be working on Shabbos. So that this is like a huge fail, right? This is like an epic fail of a system. They tell you, here's what you do, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If it's a Tuesday, you're going to miss all of them. So what's the logic here? Rav Havachayle L'train Machzirin Havet Avid Shovsa. No, Rav, his army is his strength. The strength of his argument is that if you do it 2 cycles, then you end up getting a Shabbos. So this is presuming that you the 6-day work week, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you go back to 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Somewhere along that second cycle, you'll end up catching Shabbos. And we'll just quickly note this now. We'll jump down a little pause. Other commentaries, the Shiare Karban here notes, the Kasha ha'imish tabai b'yom vav, I feel the train machzirin eno olala lo yom echad Shabbos. Right? If you get captured on a Friday, again, do the math at home. Even after 2 whole cycles, you won't end up getting Shabbos on the right day. And the Guggenheim commentary cited on Sefaria, so he throws in a note. He says, if we presume Rav Nachman's scheme is periodic, he pauses after 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, etc., then his Sabbath will only be correct in the 2nd period. In fact, the 7th of his Sabbaths in the 8th try. So in this scenario, you need to do a whole, like you'll end up keeping 7 different Sabbaths until you get there. He does out some of the math here. People are note the bold. Everyone's welcome to look at that later. The correct observation of the Sabbath first occurs in the 2nd circuit, the 8th try. Again, try that at home. But basically, this system is not terribly good at capturing all of the dates. Now, the approach that would get you, without having overly short weeks, that would get you to the answer very quickly would be the 5-day week, right? Because you say keep the first day, let's say you say every week you keep 5 days and then Shabbos, and then you do that a few times, you'll end up getting it. I think even in 1 cycle. So, but the goal here is somewhat different. We'll think about that in a bit. Fine. So let's continue in the Gemara on this view, the 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 view. He says, "Ve'ein lo litmoa v'yachosh l'chol hayamim kahad kiddush echad ba'olam." Wait a second. Here's another possibility. No one's raised this before. Well, except we sort of did in the Bavli, but at least not in the Yerushalmi. Doesn't he need to worry about all the days, just like someone who marries a woman? So, okay, so here's the scenario. You have a man, a Jewish man marries a Jewish woman, except he forgets who she is. Right? I think these things happen all the time in Vegas and such. So here's the problem. Number one, he can't divorce her because he doesn't know where she is or who she is. Now, technically, old school, certainly in the time of the Gemara, polygamy is an option. So it's not like marrying another woman would be a problem per se, except here's the problem. How do you know any woman this man would want to marry? Maybe she's a close relative of the woman that he already is married to. So how do you know? Maybe he married this woman's mother, sister, or whatever. So then he can't marry anyone. He can't marry any woman because she might be related in an incest prohibition sort of way, related to the woman he already married and forgot. So this should be the same thing. A little bit complicated, but our case is simpler. It's an equal problem, right? You don't know which day is Shabbos. You forgot. So you have to keep every day as Shabbos. You should never be able to do work. Again, obviously allowing for subsistence. So that's the Gemara's question here. So, and we just throw in the discussion there. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha is Palgan, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Lakish. There's a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish about a case of a man who marries a woman and doesn't know who she is. Rabbi Yochanan Rachoshes the Chol Anashim. Rabbi Yochanan says he has to be worried. Any woman might be related to his first wife and can't marry them. Rish Lakish Amar Eina Choshes the Chol Anashim. He says, you don't need to worry about that. Right? The numbers it's so unlikely. So why don't we compare this case to that case? Why don't we say, just like you have to worry that you can't get married to anyone in that scenario, same thing here. You can't do any work any day of the week because it might be Shabbos. What's the difference? Taman yesh lo takana yachahu lisa giores yachahu lisa mishuchreres hacha ma islan. So here's an important difference: is that in the case of you're worried, you're married to someone, and anyone you meet might be their their relative, well, someone who on the basis of halacha has no relatives for the purposes of the incest prohibition, Giores or Mishukreres, you can marry them, and that would solve your problems. You have some solution. Again, it does narrow the pool of women this man can marry significantly. If he's a Kohen, that's a good question. Technically, a Kohen might have a scenario of let's say, a woman who had no living close relatives at the time of his first wedding. So maybe you could come up with an additional scenario. But yeah, the Kohen might be a problem because he wouldn't have those options. But fine, at least in theory, there's an option. So whereas here, there's nothing you can do. What can you do? It's, every day is Shabbos, then you'll not have a life. You won't be able to do anything. You won't ever be able to work. So therefore, we allow you to keep Shabbos once every 7 days. That's all the Yerushalmi. And now this last line, and note the big shift. Taman Amrin, Taman meaning Sham, meaning there, we say, what does there we say mean? This is the Talmud Yerushalmi. So there means Bavel, Babylonia. Out in Babylonia, they say, Choshesh l'chol hayamim v'oseh kedei kiyum hanefesh. He needs to be concerned about all days, which basically is what we suggested. We just suggested and rejected that idea, right? Don't you have to worry at Shabbos every day? And so the Yerushalmi itself rejects that, but it says, you know what? In Bavel, they are worried about that. He has to worry that every day is Shabbos. V'oseh kedei kiyum hanefesh. You can only work to the extent that it keeps you alive, right? Because you don't need to die. But any more work than that is prohibited. And that's of course Rava's opinion that we saw in the Bavli. So the Yerushalmi is aware of this opinion, but it doesn't seem to accept it. It just sort of mentions it. But so just to do inventory on all the opinions we have the wait 6 days and keep Shabbos and wait 6 days, which both seem to be views that you can do whatever you want the other 6. Then we have Rava's view that you need to treat every day as maybe Shabbos, and the 7th day you do something a little special, Kiddush and Havdalah. And you have Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Elazar's view that the 654-321. Now, Ozzy asks, why not do Shabbos every other day? You're guaranteed to observe Shabbos every 2 weeks. I think that is a sort of middle position. I think the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Elazar's of the world would say that's too much. We can't expect the person to keep Shabbos every other day. They keep Shabbos more or less once a week. Some weeks are longer, some weeks are shorter. But to say you keep Shabbos half the time, that's overly onerous. Now, obviously, the Babylonian view, Rava's view, is even more onerous. Okay, but no one wants to get into that middle view. Permanent Tishrei, yeah, a lot of tshuva, and same idea, a lot of Shabbos. So yeah, but Ozzy, in theory, that's a valid middle view. But I think everyone is on one side or the other in terms of how much we're gonna impose on you. We're gonna impose on you everything, or more or less the usual standard of once a week, right? And that middle view, every other day doesn't come up. Maybe for Messianic times, could be. There are scenarios. Some this gets a little technical, but like let's say you can do one melacha, one prohibited action that can provide food for 2 days. So if you could somehow pull that off, it's controversial what you should do, but there is the view that okay, good, do that, and then work on Tuesday or whatever, work on one day, make double food, and then don't work the next day. If you can do that, then let's say Rava would say certainly that's preferable. Not everyone agrees, but that is a possible view that would come out like Ozzy's suggestion. Okay, so we have the Yerushalmi, we have the Bavli. I think the big question here is when we talk about Shabbos. Well, both I think some views will clearly be on one side or the other. Some views will be a bit more tricky. We're talking about keeping Shabbos here. Why are you keeping Shabbos? What's the nature of the Shabbos you're keeping? Are you aiming to keep sort of the objective Shabbos? You trying to hit the right day? Or are you saying, I'm not going to get the right day. I don't care about that. I'm keeping a subjective Shabbos, a Shabbos for me. You'll notice the title of this shir, I wasn't sure what to go with. So I said Shabbos, a desert in time, which if for those of you who know a little bit about Heschel, so his book, The Sabbath, he talks about the Sabbath as a palace in time, right? It's this beautiful thing that we sort of separate from the rest of the world. It's a palace in time. So this is sort of Shabbos as a desert in time. You're stuck in your deserted place, but you can still come up with this subjective Shabbos. Maybe you don't know what the right day is. You don't know when Shabbos is. You're not going to hit the correct day of Shabbos, so to speak. But for you, subjectively, you're going to have that Shabbos experience. And maybe that's what you should aim for. So let's go through the various views and see who's trying to get an objective Shabbos, who's trying to get a subjective Shabbos, and who's a little less clear. Well, what do people say? Let's say the first two views, right? Shabbos, 6 days of work and then one of Shabbos, or 1 day of Shabbos and then 6 days of work. What's that view? What are they aiming for? Subjective, right? Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct, Nathan. Because think about it, right? You're keeping Shabbos every 7 days, which in theory is nice, but that means there's a 6 in 7 chance that you're never going to keep Shabbos. Okay, Ozzy doesn't like that view. He's not sure the Torah is interested in subjectivity. But of course, the authors of that view, Rav, Shmuel, whoever else, would beg to differ, right? They say you keep every 7 days. Maybe ideally the Torah wants you to keep the objective day. Now, that's clear, right? Everyone agrees if you know what day of the week it is, keeping Shabbos on Tuesday is not really helpful, right? But the question is, if you don't know, you don't have that option. Is it better to aim and maybe miss, or is it better to double down on your day? Now, you could still say, well, you're keeping 1 and then 6 because you're taking a risk. Whatever day you choose is going to be a risk, right? You pick day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever day you're choosing is going to be a risk. Take your risk and lean in on it, right? It's like a VC over here, right? Your Shabbos has a 1 in 7. Your pseudo Shabbos day has a 1 in 7 payoff, but it's a big payoff. You get Shabbos right every week. So you could argue that even the Rav and Shmuel or whatever other names are associated with it view is really aiming to get the right day. It's just they don't care if they don't want to get it right once. They want to get it right every week, and they're willing to bet everything. They put all their chips on this day that they're going with. Right? So it is possible to read them that way, although it certainly feels more like a subjective view. What about the view we saw in the Yerushalmi, the 6-5-4-3-2-1 view? Objective, are you aiming at the objective Shabbos or a subjective experience of Shabbos? Both. Okay. How would that work? Other thoughts? Other people have people can speak up too, by the way, and you don't need to write if you're a talking person. But okay, so Ozzy, I'm curious to hear what you think by both. What I would have said, and it sounds like the Gemara itself says this, is you experience some Sabbaths as wrong days and some as right days of the week. Okay, I mean, the way the Gemara looks at it is the Gemara says, like, wait a second, if you do it this way, you're going to miss out on Shabbos through the whole cycle. It sounds like the goal is to hit Shabbos on the right day. Right? Notice we don't ask that on the other opinions. The opinions that say you keep Shabbos every 7 days, you're not going to hit Shabbos 6 out of 7, 6 out of 7 chances. You're never going to hit Shabbos, and we don't care. That's not our problem. But this 6-5-4-3-2-1, it's like an odd structure, right? Why would you structure the subjective experience of Shabbos is supposed to be 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. What does it mean to have, once every couple months, I have a 1 day work week? That's really weird, right? Why would you set it up like that unless you're aiming at hitting the real Shabbos? Now, again, the exact math of it, you maybe can have other mathematical systems. But right, as Alana's saying, you're willing to give up the 7 day a week structure most of the time with the hopes of hitting Shabbos more frequently, or trying to catch Shabbos. You'll try a 6 day week and see if that works. Try a 5 day week, see if that works, etc. It feels like you're aiming at hitting the objective Shabbos. Now, notice how we don't go all the way down to a 0 day week, and that could be for a lot of reasons. It could be because it's just sort of meaningless. What does it mean to rest after having a 0 day work week? Right? For those of us who've experienced 2 day yuntifs or 3 day yuntifs or whatnot, it's sort of a weird feeling. You get into it a few days, like, oh, this is great, rest. Then like day 3 of rest, you're like, wait, I want to go up and get up and do something already. So it could be that it's just not Shabbos if you have no work in between, or it could be, and maybe this is what Ozzy was saying, even on the view, the 6-5-4-3-2-1 view, you need to have a week structure. It could be a 6 day week, it could be a 1 day week, but there needs to be some sort of structure of a week. Otherwise, subjectively, it's not Shabbos. Right, so I think that would go in the other direction. And what about Rava? What about Rava's view, the Babylonian view, that you every day might be Shabbos, you have to work minimally every day, and then you do, on the 7th day you do Kiddush. What do people think about that? Objective. Okay, certainly there's a major objective element in the sense that every day you're not working except what you need to eat, right? So certainly that's a powerful piece of it. Other perspectives? Well, what's up with the Kiddush? Why are you making Kiddush and Havdalah on the seventh day? What's that about? Think about it. If every day is equally likely to be Shabbos, why don't you make Kiddush every day? Or make Havdalah every day, on the chance that it might be. So you're not willing to do that. So it seems like there's two sides of the coin here for Rabbi, right? He's trying to have his Shabbos cake and eat it too, which I definitely advise everyone to have Shabbos cake. It's good for owning Shabbos. But to both say, I'm keeping every day, I'm trying to minimize that risk. That's true. He's very worried about the objective Shabbos factor, and he also wants to be sure to have some subjective experience of Shabbos once a week. If every day is the same, you're missing something. If you don't say once every 7 days, I'm going to sanctify this day, I'm going to set it aside, it's different. It may not be so different in practice because I have a weird life situation, but it's at least in theory different. It's set aside as Shabbos. I'm experiencing Shabbos. I'm remembering God as creator of the world. At least I have that, if nothing else. Now, I think the view of Rava is the bracha levatala. Great question. We'll get there in a minute. Rava's view is the most important view in the sense that it's accepted as authoritative. You look in the Rambam, you look in the Shulchan Aruch, everyone paskins like Rava, and that's sort of to be expected because as we saw in the Bavli, it sort of came out of the Gemara, right? The Gemara said, the Gemara presented the other opinions, then it said Rava's opinion, it asked questions on it, and then it gave answers. It seems like Rava's view was the settled view, and that's in fact how the halacha paskins. But now this of course leads to our big question. What's the main aspect in Rava? Is Rava really about the objective or is he really about the subjective? And we're going to see in our remaining time, and time flies when you're asking deep theological questions, we're going to see different possible understandings of Rava's view. So first, Rashi here, right? Notice we said, right, every day you have to not do work, only the amount of work to the next day. What about the seventh day? How's the seventh day different? Kiddush and Havdalah, b'kiddush and Havdalta. So Rashi explains that L'zikaron be'alma, you're not. It's just a commemoration. It's not a real Kiddush and a real Havdalah. It's a pseudo Kiddush. It's a commemoration. Why? Sheyehelo shem yom chaluk mishar yamim. You want to have in name at least. You want to have a name that's different than the other ones. You call this Shabbos. Is it really Shabbos? No, it's no more Shabbos than the other day. We're going to call it Shabbos for you to remember. Shabbos mimenu, in order that you don't forget Shabbos. So there's a couple of possibilities what this means, but it's not that this day is different than the other days in any inherent way. It's an arbitrary choice of a day for the simple purpose of reminding you when Shabbos is. Now, what's the value of or not when Shabbos is, that Shabbos is, right? About the existence of Shabbos. What's the value of remembering Shabbos? Now, it could be a few different things. First of all, there's a mitzvah in the Torah, Zucker is Yom Shabbos, to remember Shabbos. So I don't know if it counts. It may or may not count if you don't know what day it is, but you remember that there is a day of Shabbos that I'm not sure when it is, maybe, or even if not, if you don't fulfill the mitzvah, at least to have consciousness of Shabbos is a valuable thing, right? Let's say to understand, to be aware of God as creator of the world, to be aware that God asks us to rest, even if you can't really do it too much or you're doing it too much, however you look at it. But maybe there's a value of that, or possibly you can remember Shabbos for the purposes of keeping it once you get out of the desert, or the Shabbos desert that you're in. Right? Maybe the goal is not to forget, not for now. It doesn't help you now because you don't know when Shabbos is, but maybe at least when you get out of the desert, you'll know when Shabbos is, and it'll help you then. So there's a couple of possibilities in Rashi, but Rashi and several other Rishonim also is fairly clear. The goal here is not that this is really Shabbos. It's to remember for some side purpose. The Ritva says similarly, Mona Shisha Masham Yom Echad, you wait 6 and keep 1. Perish Rama lemevad hachi. They wanted him to do this. Why? Kadei shelo tishtakach Torah Shabbos mimenu, in order that he not forget when Shabbos is. So notice what the Ritva does. He's commenting on those first opinions. Right? Remember at the beginning of the Gemara, Mona Shisha Masham Yom Echad, you keep 6 days of Chol and 1 day of Shabbos. Even those views, says the Ritva, it's not really Shabbos, right? We said those are probably objective. Nah, the Ritva says the reason you're doing that is just so you remember the idea of Shabbos. You don't really, it's not like this day is really Shabbos, the other ones aren't. It's fake. It's so you don't forget. Really, the real Shabbos is the objective Shabbos. This is some sort of pseudo recognition point that's less important. Inami hichmiru alav divahachi ramya nafsheu midkar. Or, and this is an interesting idea, the hope is if you keep a day of Shabbos, it'll jog your memory. You'll be like, Shabbos, I remember Shabbos. Here's the last time it was Shabbos. Oh wait, that was 10 days ago. My count is off. Somehow you'll jog your memory by keeping Shabbos. That's why they want you to do it. Again, it's an extrinsic reason. It's not like today is any more Shabbos than any other day. We just arbitrarily have you do something or not arbitrarily. I guess there's some logic, some psychological logic to help you remember when Shabbos was. Right? The Meiriya says even more strongly about the Kiddush and Havdalah. The Ein Zeh halacha el zikaron be'alma. It's not a halacha to keep to make Kiddush and Havdalah. It's just a commemoration. Again, like Rashi. On the other extreme, and this is really a pretty big opposite extreme, is the Radbaz with David ben Zimra, 16th century Spain. And of all things, he's talking about the international date line. So, that's pretty random, but let's see how this ties in. Let's see how the international date line will somehow tie this all together. So he says, Sha'alta mimeni odiach hadati be'inyan haShabbos ki yesh chiluk gadol bein hashochnim b'mizrach l'shochnim b'marav nimsa shehu shema shehu le'elu Shabbos havi le'elu chol. People didn't realize that there was this international date line thing. People didn't realize that if you're, let's say, in Spain versus in Israel, that sundown is like hours apart. People didn't realize that until later. So the 16th century, the Radbaz says, someone asks him, wait a second, what's the deal? People live in different places. Shabbos starts at different times. Now, for us, we sort of take this for granted because we all know, what time does Shabbos come in your city? That's like a normal question to ask. Before people traveled regularly or knew what was going on in other parts of the world, the assumption was Shabbos is this 24-hour period. The world goes into Shabbos and then it comes out. Wait, what does it mean that people start Shabbos at different times? How could that be? And here's his answer. Tshuva da kishel zenavochu barabim v'nichbadim. A lot of people had trouble with it. Avodicha datiba. Dakia Shabbos nimsar l'kol echad miYisrael. He has this principle. Shabbos is given to every person in Israel. Why? Shneimar ki osi beinu v'nechem. It's a sign between me, God, and you, Israel. And ukmo she'os habrisu l'chol echad be'echad v'chein haShabbos nimsar kol echad be'echad. Just like the covenant overall, every person has their relationship to the covenant of Torah. Every person also has their relationship to the covenant of Shabbos. Became Shabbos nimshal l'chol echad b'chol makom shehu moneh shisha yamim v'sof shisha osa Shabbos shehu zeichel ma'asav reishis. Shneimar kishesh yom v'sar Hashem v'chulei she'im ein ata omer kein afil b'Yisrael yishlik ksas. Fine, that's a side point. But the main point here is because Shabbos is a covenant with each person. Therefore, it works subjectively. And for every person, you count 6 days, and then you have Shabbos, and that's your Shabbos subjectively. And that reminds you about God's creation of the world. He's doubling down on this idea of a subjective Shabbos. And his biggest proof for that is, he talks about some side issues, but here's his biggest proof for his view. Ugdolam izo amru. Here's the big proof. Hamahalach b'midbar. Our Sugyot. What do you do if you're stuck in the desert? You count 6 days. Then on the 7th day, you do Kiddush. You say Berachas Hayom. You daven. Maxine, to answer your question, on his view, it's a little controversial, but on the Radbaz's view, you do all the davening of Shabbos, and then you make Havdalah. So at least in terms of davening, this day is totally Shabbos. Adkan. Okay, fine. Right? What about the other side of the Rabbi's opinion that you every day might be Shabbos and you don't work every day? Okay, fine. That's you're trying to hedge your bets. That's a doubt. Okay, fine. Because there's a risk about objective Shabbos. That's not the real deal. That's like a side point. Or maybe it's there's a part of time. His assumption is like across the Eurasian continent, there's only 12 hours difference in time, which I think is basically true. And there's like 12 hours of Shabbos when the whole world, which I guess doesn't include North America, the whole world has Shabbos. and then there's no wiggle room. So leaving aside that sort of an interesting side point, but what's the main point? Mikol makom lamadnu milchayvuhu lekadesh shvi'i mashum lekol echad nimsar laso zeich lemaisa bereishis kol chad v'chad ki asrei. This proves that every person in every city has a subjective obligation to keep Shabbos based on whatever times it is there, right? Based on sundown and sunrise or sundown to sundown, wherever you are. And even though it's hours off, right? America is whatever, 7 to 10 hours off of Israel, and that's fine. So you don't need to keep Shabbos at the same time. Every place has its own subjective Shabbos. Again, we take this for granted, but it's really weird. If you didn't realize that this is how the world works, the idea that Shabbos is not one 24-hour period for the world, but actually it's sort of like a sliding 48-hour period, depending on where you are on the globe, that's really weird. But the Rabbi says that shouldn't be surprising at all, because we know this idea of subjective Shabbos, that's what Shabbos is all about from our Sugya. And notice how he plays up the Kiddush and Havdalah, and he minimizes, he says, okay, you don't do work every day because you want to hedge your bet. But the real Shabbos is the subjective Shabbos, the day you make up, right? The day you realize today, you keep Shabbos 7 days later, that's the real Shabbos. And that can then serve as a proof for how time zones work in regard to Shabbos. So the Rabbis really has the opposite extreme view of what we saw in Rashi and some of the other Rishonim. Rashi and the Rishonim say, Kiddush and Havdalah, it's a nice reminder. It's not really telling you anything about Shabbos. Your subjective experience is a reminder, but it's not really what Shabbos is about. The Rabbi says, no, that is what Shabbos is about. The subjective experience is the point. And that's his view of Rava. Okay, I see there's some questions. Can you have the Zucker without the Shamur of Shabbos? So I guess that's a question. It's an important question. Generally, we think that Zucker and Shamur are sort of tied together. Certainly, Havdalah and maybe Kiddush also are tied to the idea that you don't do work on this day. So what does it mean to say you do Kiddush and Havdalah, but in terms of malacha, in terms of work, today's the same as every other day? What sort of Kiddush and Havdalah is that? So Ozzy, I think this depends a bit on how on our very question. If you think, like the Radvaz, that the real Shabbos is this subjective Shabbos, then I think he would say something like not doing work on this seventh day is somehow different than the other days. I don't know if it's different in practice, but at least its significance is different, because this day is the real Shabbos. It's Shabbos like anyone else. The other days you're trying to hedge your bet, but this is the real Shabbos. That's why you make Kiddush and Havdalah, because it's tied to that. For Rashi and the other views, they would say, you're making Kiddush and Havdalah. How is that separable from the malacha aspect? The answer is it's not. Or I guess it's not a real Kiddush and Havdalah, so it doesn't matter anyway. It's a Kiddush and Havdalah to help remind you. So it's less significant that it's separated from the rest. Just want to take a look at one final source, and then we'll take some final questions. Let's see here. Does one recite Shabbos prayers? So the Rambam, and I think the Radbaz was quoting the Rambam before. He throws in here. Where's the line? Right. Shabbos. Where does he say? He says the davening thing somewhere, I think. Well, you know what? Either way, the Ritva gives both sides of this view. So let's take a look at the Ritva. This is Maxine's question. If you're not sure what day it is, how can you say brachos? How can you say, let's say the brachos of Kriya Shema, Baruch Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Yom HaShvi. So that's a suffix, right? You're not sure if today's Shabbos or not. When in doubt, in terms of brachos, usually do without. You're not supposed to say a brach. So why not? So why do you say it? When we say, sometimes we say that if you're biblically commanded to say a bracha, then you do it out of doubt. Let's say benching. Benching is biblically ordained. If you're not sure if you benched or not, you ate a meal, you're not sure if you benched, bench again, or possibly again. So, but no, that's only true because shehu yodea shehu chayav bracha. That's if you know you have to say the bracha. You ate. Then the question is, did you actually bench or not? We say you should do it a second time if you're not sure if you did it the first time. Vadai, beracha vadai, ela shehu misubagim berach olam. So, but here there'd be no prohibition. So there'd be no obligation. So therefore, you wouldn't say the brachos, right? On this first view, fine. So that's on this question at least. You shouldn't say the brachos. So how does he answer? Yesh lomer the suffix bracha levatala isura derabananhu. You have to consider what are the stakes. If you say a bracha levatala, this is a little controversial. The Ritva thinks it's only a derabanan. It's only a rabbinic prohibition to say a bracha when it's not necessary. and that's outweighed by the value of possibly saying the right bracha. So you do say the brachas in the davening of Shabbos. Inami below bracha kamar, or without a bracha. So you can say Kiddush and Havdalah and all the other brachos without a bracha. Baruch atah mikadesh. What is it like? Right, Baruch atah Hashem mikadesh Shabbos and Kiddush. You just say Baruch atah mikadesh Shabbos. It's not the full bracha. You didn't say God's name, but it can't be a bracha l'talix. It's not a full bracha, and that's what the Gemara means. So this question of whether you're saying a real Kiddush and Havdalah or not, and similarly the question of whether you're saying a real brachos the rest of the day, ties into our question as well, right? If you think it's really Shabbos, then of course you just say the brachos. It's not you're not thinking about it as suffix or not. So it's like the second day of Yantiv. Some Rishonim, some commentaries explicitly compare it to the second day of Yantiv in Chutz La'aretz. Right? The second day of Yantiv is at best the suffix, or it's an institutionalized suffix, and yet we say all sorts of brachos. You say Kiddush on Yantiv Sheni, right? Why? It's a suffix. Same thing here. This day is institutionalized as the day you keep as Shabbos, so therefore you say brachos, even though it involves God's name, and it theoretically might be wrong, but we're treating it as if it's the correct day. Alternatively, if you don't say the real bracha, that would very strongly fit with Rashi's view, that really Rava is really an objective Shabbos view. This every 7 days Kiddush Havdalah thing is just a reminder. It's just you don't forget Shabbos. It's some secondary point. It's not the main point. Okay, we're out of time. I'm going to stop share. We'll take some questions. Yeah, and there's also discussion. I see Ozzy talk about tefillin. Whole discussion about what to do about tefillin. I included, I think, one source in the sheet. I don't know if you can, saying a condition or not so simple, because it might be muktzah if it's Shabbos. But a lot of you say you put on tefillin every day, 7 days of the week, but you don't put it on during Shabbos davening, because that's a little bit of an internal contradiction. In any event, any questions or thoughts on what we've seen here? Really a fascinating topic that touches on a lot of deep theological issues. If not, then I'll remind everyone next week we're going to be looking at the topic of a Nachri Shabbos, a gentile who keeps Shabbos, and how that's not recommended under normal circumstances. And we'll think about what that tells us, different perspectives on that view, and what that tells us about Shabbos, what that tells us about distinction between Jews and Gentiles on different views in rabbinic tradition. Maxine, what else is there?
There's a question from Nathan. Sorry. It just showed up. So.
Oh yes. Okay. Great. Why does Rava not say to make Kiddush and Havdalah every day? Yeah, it's a good question, and I think on some views, like on Rashi and Ritva's views, it's very clear, right? Because the Kiddush and Havdalah, it's not, you can't. Let's say to start with, you can't make Kiddush and Havdalah every day because it's meaningless. You're not distinguishing. The days are all the same. You're not sanctifying this day as opposed to the others. If every day you're saying Kiddush, it stops being a Kiddush. Now, why do you do it on the seventh day? That's because of this, the secondary, less important subjective Shabbos. According to Rabbi, he would say the opposite point, right? Why don't you say Kiddush and Havdalah every day? Because this is the real Shabbos. This is the real day, and that's why you do it. How about Ones Rachmana Patre? So Ones Rachmana Patre, Ozzy would explain, right? Ones that being if one acts under duress or does something out of their control, they're not responsible for it. That works arguably to exempt the person after the fact, right? If you stuck in the desert and you don't do everything properly, let's say, maybe you might say, well, that was extenuating circumstance. The person didn't violate Shabbos, or they're exempt from their violation of Shabbos. But Ones Rachmana Patre doesn't work prospectively. You can't say, well, this is really hard, so therefore I don't need to keep halacha, right? Again, unless there's something like you're going to die or whatever. But Ones Rachmana Patre is only after the fact to exempt you from punishment. You can't use that to say, I'm going to now do something and then say it's not my, say it was out of my control. So Ones does work, but only after the fact. If there are no other questions, then if Maxine has a final announcements. Yes.
I don't think there are any more questions. I don't see anything in the Facebook. So yes, thank you so much again for leading us through these ideas. And so next week we actually have some special programming going on in addition to the regular spring classes. So next Sunday before class here, I mean, it'll still be here wherever you are on Zoom, but before this year, there is a pre-purim Yom Ian. The title theme is One Nation Dispersed, Diaspora in the Megillah and in Jewish Thought. And Rabbi Silber, Dr. Malka Simkovich, and Dr. Micha Gottlieb will be teaching. And also, many of us, I'm sure, have our thoughts kind of turn toward Ukraine these days. And of course, that was a wellspring of Torah and Jewish culture. So we have some excellent teachers returning to Drisha to teach on, different elements of that. So we have Rabbi Dr. Ariel Mays here tomorrow, Monday, March 7th from 1 to 2 p.m., who's going to share some Torah from the Chernobyl Rabbi, Menachem Nachem Chernobyl. And then on Tuesday, Rabbi Eli Fisher will be teaching some responsa from Ukraine. So looking at kind of a humanist side of halacha. And then Ms. Dahlia Wolfson, I don't think she has her PhD yet, but coming soon, will be looking at Jewish Ukraine through the work of Sholem Aleichem. So yeah, that's what we have coming up. Thank you, and looking forward to next week.